My friend confessed his love to my wife, flipped out, then locked me out of my own house. You won't believe how this nightmare ended. Plus one update. This is not New York City. My wife and I let an old friend of hers, we will call him Pete, stay with us for a while. Pete was going through a hard time after the death of a parent and losing his job. We offered to let him crash in our spare bedroom for a month or so while he figured things out. Pete moved in on March 28th, and we had him sign something that said he would leave on June 30th, whether he had his affairs sorted or not. This was partially to put a hard limit on the amount of time he would be living with us, but primarily because my brother was going to spend about 6 weeks in town for work, starting in mid-July, and would be staying with us. Pete did not seem to be in much of a rush to find a new job, let alone find his own place. But he was in a bit of a funk due to the whole situation, so we had been giving him the benefit of the doubt. On June 1st, my wife reminded Pete that he had to go at the end of the month. He said not to worry and that he would definitely have something figured out by then. She gave him the same reminder on Wednesday, June 12th. I will spare you the details, but this time Pete countered by confessing that he had always been in love with her and that she should leave me. He suggested that I could find a new place while they stayed in the apartment. This was sort of funny because while I consider this to be her apartment as much as mine, I purchased it before we met and her name is not on anything. Anyway, she obviously shut this down immediately, and Pete did not respond well at all. There was no violence, but a ton of shouting, insulting, and attempting to guilt trip. It was intense enough that my wife just cut out to her mother's place, where she called me to fill me in on the situation. I went home from work and told Pete that we would stick to the agreement despite his behavior, but the sooner he was out, the better. I spoke to my wife later that evening, and we decided that until Pete left, she would stay in an investment property of mine that was luckily vacant at the moment. I, however, would start working remotely and stay at the apartment more or less 24/7, both to make sure Pete did not do anything stupid, and because my presence in the living room would hopefully be more than a little awkward for him. So, the next morning, around 6 a.m., I left to run to the office to grab some stuff I would need while working from home. I got back to the apartment about half an hour later, and as I stepped out of the elevator, I saw a guy with a toolbox leaving my apartment. I immediately noticed that a new deadbolt had been installed in the door. I tried to explain the situation to the locksmith, but he basically told me that the lock was already in and he had given the only key to the guy in the apartment. He said it was between the two of us now. Lovely. I asked him for a card. He said he did not have any, so I asked where he worked. He told me that it was not any of my business and reiterated that this was between me and Pete. I followed him downstairs, and luckily he was in a van that had a sticker with the company's name and information on the side. I called the number, asked to speak to the boss, and told him what had happened. He more or less did his best not to answer any of my questions, saying, "I am sorry, but I do not have to inform you of our policies." Fun, so this is where I was at then. I called the police just to get a report filed, but I was 100% sure that when the officers showed up, they were going to tell me that it was a civil issue. I was not expecting them anytime soon, as this was a pretty small potatoes deal in the city where the whole thing was taking place. I was actually all set to offer Pete a cash for keys deal if he was not getting his stuff in gear by June 23rd, but I had a feeling that I was going to have to evict him now. I own a few investment properties and have gone through the eviction process before, so I know that would not be a fun process given how tenant-friendly my state is, but it is what it is. We had that vacant rental property to stay in while everything got sorted out, so that was covered as well. The original poster received a call from the owner of the locksmith company, who sounded as angry as he was. The owner was sending a guy over with a new deadbolt and a few extra keys. Apparently, he had already arranged for his man to show up with some police officers, in case Pete was not a fan of the lock being changed. The original poster noted that in explaining this, he got to hear somebody say, "I know a guy who knows a guy," in real life, and now wanted to hang out with this dude. The original poster mentioned that his mother-in-law had taken his wife out to get her mind off of the situation, but she was now being returned home. The locksmith was scheduled to arrive around 8 p.m., and Pete's brother was going to swing by around the same time to see if he could talk some sense into him. He thanked everyone for their advice and well wishes. Update. Things kind of managed to sort themselves out. The original poster received a call while getting ready to head back to the apartment to meet the locksmith. It was Pete's brother. The original poster apologized for the lack of details, explaining that he did not know much about exactly what went down, and a chunk of what he did know was personal information that Pete's brother, who had just done him an enormous favor, probably would not want him sharing. Anyway, the gist of the phone call was that Pete's brother went by and performed a third-party, constructive eviction with the back of his hand. So Pete was gone, as was most of his stuff. His brother was going to swing by next week to grab any odds and ends that they may have missed. The original poster was planning on making him dinner and giving him a bottle of good whiskey when he did so. As far as Pete went, the original poster was thinking that he would follow through with at least the early part of the eviction process, just in case Pete tried anything sneaky. He planned to speak to his attorney about this first, but Pete was still in the wind. It turned out he was staying at a cabin his girlfriend's family owned, and it was pretty much as close to being in the middle of nowhere as human-built structures can get. His admin or paralegal, the original poster was not sure what her specific role was, said that the previous day was the one day he was not going into town for cell service. This gave them the opportunity to convince him that the situation was currently way worse than it ever was, and as much as the original poster loved this guy, he was really fun to mess with, so that was cool. After speaking with him, the original poster called the owner of the locksmith to let him know that the apartment was vacant, so his guy would not need to show up with police. It turned out the owner was planning on coming by to handle this himself anyway, so that was easy enough. The original poster met him over there. He had a handful of deadbolts to choose from, and he switched out the lock in about 5 minutes. They started chatting about baseball, because that is what you do in New York. And this led to the original poster's offer to buy him a beer, so they could watch the White Sox smack their Yankees around. The original poster got some backstory at the bar. And while this was second-hand information, the man seemed pretty reliable, so he had no reason not to believe him. The guy who came over the previous morning was indeed an employee of his, but he was not on the clock and actually borrowed the deadbolt without mentioning anything. It turned out he was an old friend of Pete's and had been fed a story about an insane landlord who had decided to move into the apartment Pete was renting. Brilliant. Anyway, the original poster's new locksmith buddy told him that this guy was officially unemployed as of that afternoon. He would feel bad for the man, but he was too busy not caring about what his motivation was due to the complete and total lack of any attempt to verify the story he had been fed. This also explained the non-answers the original poster got when he called the shop. The person he spoke to was a manager who had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. He was basically trying to buy some time to speak with the owner and the guy who installed the deadbolt instead of just pulling an excuse out of his rear for the original poster. He wished he had been told that in the first place, but he did appreciate the fact that he did not just try to go into cover-your-ass mode for the company or his now former coworker. All in all, the original poster had a new preferred locksmith for when he needed something done at any of his properties. So really, the only legal situation left was the restraining order. And Pete very kindly sent the original poster's wife a few emails the previous night upon figuring out that she had blocked his number. The original poster would not go into detail, but he would just say that the contents should make the restraining order easy to obtain. So, thanks for all of the help and well wishes, but it seemed like this was more or less a wrap, and a pretty amusing one too. His wife had gone from being upset about the whole thing to uncharacteristically indignant, which she had admitted was kind of cathartic for her. So the original poster did not even have a reason to feel guilty about laughing at what a moron Pete was.